Here we are again.
What another week.
Unbelievable. What's your top story for this week?
Well, I think top story in China and in Asia is, of course, Nancy Pelosi's potential visit.
I know. By the time this gets aired, it's going to be decided one way or another. But let's talk about what is her motivation in doing this.
I think you know this better than I do. It's all domestic. She's going to probably lose her House Speaker position after the midterms.
You know, I was involved in politics. You were at the United Nations, so you know politics too.
From the other angle, yeah.
From the other angle. But I can tell you, I mean, it seems like she's interested in taking away the anti-China card from the Republican side. But I don't think that's going to make a difference in terms of the way people are voting. Right now, it's almost 80% of people, their number one issue in the United States is the economy. And on top of that is inflation. This is what puzzles me. They've made no headway. There's no plan for inflation. It keeps going up. Price of gas, bread, milk, housing, you name it, continues. And all of a sudden there's this big push to go overseas, to go wandering around Asia.
Not only for her to wander around Asia, what about Biden's visit to the Middle East?
Well, yeah, but I mean, here are all these summits. You had ASEAN, you have, and now Africa's coming up. It was a disaster with the Summit of Americas.
That's right.
ASEAN was a disaster. I mean, inviting heads of state to Washington during pandemic times, they come and you don't have an individual meeting with them. I'm flummoxed. I am completely baffled. It's like, I want to offend you.
No, I think it's really an issue of groping for the straws now. I mean, it's reached a point where they cannot address the economy. They're not addressing the inflation issues.
So go abroad. Fail at home, go abroad.
That's right. Attack Russia on Ukraine, attack China on Taiwan.
Well, but I mean, how much more can you do to Russia without, hurting your allies in Europe? So,
And I don't think the allies in Europe are going to last very much longer, especially given what's happening to Nord Stream 1.
A lot of people were taken aback by how strongly the Chinese government spoke out about this issue, about Nancy Pelosi visiting. Now, earlier this month, around the 22nd, they had somebody from the EU Parliament, the president.
Vice President.
Yeah,
right.
He came. But there wasn't as much fuss. But with Nancy Pelosi, it's really hit a nerve. I mean, I've never seen talk this serious about potentially, going to war. Why? What's your read?
I think for the Chinese side, there are two angles to this they have to look at very carefully. Number one, White House is Democrat. Nancy Pelosi is Speaker of the House from the Democratic Party. This could mean a potential shift in the U.S. position on Taiwanese independence. That's one angle. The other angle is that if Nancy Pelosi went and visited, it would open the floodgates for other allies of the U.S. to make big shows. After all, U.S. is still the leading power for the Western countries in the world. You can have second-tier, third-tier countries. Even Japanese had sent senior officials, right?
Yeah.
It's testing the waters.
Yeah.
But I think it's going to be very, very serious. Well, when this airs, we'll know already by then whether or not something does happen. She might still try something.
We're going to have to wait and see.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, while everyone's talking about the politics and possible conflict, trade deficits in Germany, Japan, South Korea, even Taiwan is now starting to look at a downturn in chips. That could be reflected in a sharp curtailment coming up. All these are massive export nations, and now they're seemingly on the rocks. fourth month in a row that South Korea has had a deficit, almost 5 billion. First time in, what, 30 years or something?
Germany for 3 months in a row.
Same with
Japan for 10 months in a row, trade deficit.
But I mean, what does this mean? I mean, this is hitting at the heart of Europe. I mean, Germany was always the lead.
Driving force. Yeah. I think it's two things. One is the pandemic has disrupted the supply chain so seriously. Second is the rise of commodity prices and energy prices. Japan, Germany, and South Korea are major importers of energy.
Yeah, it's interesting that these countries who have been powerhouses in the past worked off the idea that they got cheap energy from other places.
Yeah.
And that they were then able to export, high-tech goods to China. All right, the rest of the world.
But what happened? China is the only major non-energy country that had a major trade surplus. Broke records again.
So how do you explain it? On one side, you have the traditional powerhouses of Asia and Europe, basically, not being able to cut it, and yet China is. I mean, what's your take?
I think it's the supply chain. China has a very complete supply chain in every facet of manufacturing, including the little screws and nails and so on and so forth.
Yeah, all the things you need to make stuff.
That's right.
I still remember that Hewlett-Packard story where they were going to produce computers. Or no, it was Apple. I'm sorry,
Apple in Austin.
Yes, in Austin. And in the end, they couldn't because they couldn't get enough little screws to do the assembly in the U.S. And they still had to import them from China.
From Shenzhen.
Shenzhen. And then in the end, I think I don't hear anything about it at all.
Well, ultimately, what the supply chain does is enhances efficiency. And efficiency means profitability, right? So there's no choice. I think Germany doesn't have a complete supply chain in manufacturing. Neither does Japan. And Japan's exports, if you look at the big brands of Japan from the old days, the Panasonic, National Panasonic, Hitachi, where are they? Toshiba, where are they today?
Well, the electronic stuff is gone. They do have a tremendous amount of exports in terms of high tech and things like that. But
also car components.
Yeah, the cars seem to be doing okay, but the question is, when does the economic slowdown worldwide catch up with them? And then what are the repercussions? I mean, I'm worried about jobs. Continued inflation pushed by, food and energy, but at the same time, you're going to start to lose jobs, things. So stagflation.
Even in Japan, even in Japan, not only losing of jobs because of the recession, but I think there's another aspect. They stuck to either hydrogen vehicles or gas vehicles, whereas electric vehicles are now the direction.
That's going to change. I mean, almost every single, even the Japanese car makers are now joining the line to go towards EV, new energy vehicles. I mean, do they have a choice? I don't think they do. I mean, if you start looking at the world today, it's the only segment where you see massive rises in growth in investment and also in production.
It's interesting that Chinese EVs now constitute 10% of the European EV market too.
It's price, selection.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, everyone talks about Tesla, but they have 4 models.
Yeah.
Right.
And they're very expensive.
And they're expensive. They're at the premium end. People, they might see them as aspirational, but when you have a bunch of kids and you want something more akin to an SUV than the X, it's easier to go with Chinese brands. They're less expensive.
With our age, Einar, we've seen this. Yeah. American cars, followed by the replacement of Japanese cars,
and then
followed by Korean cars.
And now you think it's going to be the time of the Chinese car.
EVs.
Well, I'm not going to argue with you. I mean, you have the battery tech here.
Yeah.
You have all the component
scale.
pieces that are there, and also the software. And so I think a lot of people overlook that a lot of the companies that are doing the leading edge development and technology in self-driving cars are actually in China. And they're based on prior history. China is very good at solving practical issues. Remember with fast trains, everyone said, oh, China will never make a fast train, not like, Siemens or
Japanese.
or the Japanese or the French, things. And now they're the leader of the world, and their software. No one talks about how terrible their software is. No one talks about crashes because there have been very, very few incidents.
Well, if you talk about driverless cars or EVs in general, the electronics software is critical.
It is. And August 1st, it started in Shenzhen. 3 levels of autonomous driving, semi, more advanced, and completely autonomous. They're in separate zones.
Really?
Separate zones. So this is really the first city in China to allow the public to have these driverless cars. And I think this is one of the areas where people are not paying enough attention to. They talk about it, but when you talk about the demographic changes, I mean, to jobs, no more delivery guys, no more, whether trucks or DD or whatever. When you want your food, it will arrive basically on a robotic car or vehicle that will notify you, and you go down and you can pick it up. Or
there's something else here which is very interesting. I've been following discussions in China on smart roads, smart cities, and smart cars. It's possible to do because of 5G.
Yes.
Whereas Tesla, basically, the road conditions are not very well monitored.
I think he was thinking that his satellite system would give him
eventually,
an edge
right.
in that. But that doesn't give you the knowledge that you need of the road conditions, of where the specific curb is, all of these things that are necessary in order to have a complete system. Because people don't realize you can have a really smart car, but there's no redundancy.
That's right.
And there's no feedback. So you have to have a smart car and a smart city in order to have the kind of redundancy so that the car doesn't go veering off because it got the wrong idea. And the smart cities can regulate the traffic, making sure that if the car arrives at 7:10, that you'll be there at 7:15 or 7:25.
And the other part about that is the 5G infrastructure. Much of the processing work can be done in the cloud with 5G instead of in the car itself.
And this is something I've been impressed with Huawei. They've been denied the international market, or at least in developed countries, lots of places in Europe and the United States. So they pivoted. Now they talk about efficiency, making things less costly but more powerful. And then also they have become a comer in terms of the cloud. I think they're number 2 right now. And they're also having a driving solution. So let's add this up. Driverless car
Where's
solution.
it going? Where's it going?
Have the cloud.
Right.
Doing smart cities.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be an important part of where they're going to go.
I think that they're probably going to be among the best on the cloud part, because given the 5G technology, which the others don't have, the others who are running cloud operations don't have, so much of stuff can be processed in the cloud.
And you don't...
And not on physical cars or even cell phones.
But I don't think people realize there's so many data streams that will be coming in you have to almost do it in the cloud.
Yeah.
You can't do it in the car itself.
That's right.
All right. But once you have it in the cloud, they can accommodate, if there's a problem with a road, it detects a pothole, all right, because other cars have driven across it. They can notify the authorities and say, look, you need to go fix this pothole. That's not something that ever existed before.
That's right.
And it's going to change the way that cities maintain it. Because if I fix the pothole before it gets deep and starts destroying, I'm going to save a lot of money.
That's right.
I can have crews out there within 20 minutes fixing it.
Insurance companies will be very happy about that.
Well, yes and no. I mean, insurance companies are not going to be happy about traffic on the roads. Very simple reason. If there's driverless cars, the amount of physical damage and personal damage individual is going to go down dramatically. And at a certain point, without these big fees being paid, without big premiums, they'll just disappear. I mean, in fact, the municipality might, in the end, be the one who takes over the insurance, because they'll be the one providing the service, the redundancies, making sure that all the information is processed in the cloud, or maybe they put it off into a third party like Huawei. It's possible. But it's going to change everything that we know.
Again.
We've already had a lot of changes in our life, and this is going to be really something. All right, so I want to talk about this. This is a little different. Pompeo is trying to resurrect himself. I mean, he's going to be called in by the January 6th committee.
He lost 40 pounds or something.
He lost 40 pounds, but I don't think it added to his political heft.
No.
No, I don't think it. I mean, he seems to be struggling. There was big plans. He was going to run for president.
Yeah.
And he was going to have...
Isn't he still trying to do that?
Yeah, he is. But I mean, he was talking about going with Pelosi to the island. Now I don't hear anything about that.
He invited himself.
Yeah. Well, I don't think...
I'll go with Nancy.
I don't think she really wants him to come. I don't think he's being a Republican is her favorite flavor of the day.
That's right.
Yeah. So on a more positive note, Widodo, the PM of Indonesia, he came to China. He made a kind of his own tour in preparation for the G20 meeting that's coming up in November. That's going to be an important one. There's talk that at that meeting there might be a head-to-head meeting in person between Biden and Xi. I mean, right now, Indonesia is looking very...
very non-aligned.
Very non-aligned, and really reflecting, I think, a lot of this global South.
Yeah.
Everywhere from South America, Africa, Asia,
was the
Middle
Bandung
East.
Conference held in Indonesia?
Yes, it is. It was.
That formed the non-aligned.
Yes, and now it seems like history is repeating itself.
That's right.
But I mean, different pressures now. It's not just Russia and the U.S. I mean, there's more players. It's a truly multilateral world.
Yeah.
Multipolar world. And it's just...
The Indonesian visit is particularly interesting because Indonesia is a combination of industrializing country, including many manufacturers going up, but also a resource country.
And a huge population.
That's right, and a very large, I think fourth largest in the world or something.
Yes, the largest Muslim population
in the world.
Country. Although they are not they don't, I think they have a kind of, you are first Indonesian, second you are Muslim. So they haven't had the same kind of issues that you've had in places where Muslim radicals have been pushing the edge in terms of terrorism and things like that. But I mean, the amount of pressure around the world that you see in Europe, in America, against anything to do with the Muslim world, any kind of customs, I mean, the hijab, face coverings and things like that. Now, you can argue about it, but is that part of the reason why they're going non-aligned? Do they sense a cultural divide between
I think it's a
combination
of things. Indonesia is another beneficiary of the rise of Asia over the last 2 decades. Indonesia 20 years ago was basically agricultural, palm oil, wood.
Colonial
Now-
empire for
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the last 20 years, the rise of Asia with China at its core has brought very, very sophisticated supply chain participation by the ASEAN countries. And Indonesia really benefited from that.
Yeah, but I mean, I always try to think, would there have been a possibility of ASEAN rising without China, without China being this hub that it
Impossible.
was? Now, ASEAN is the #1 trade partner for China
That's right.
and still growing. You start to see the trade, as we were just talking about, with these other nations, the former powerhouses, South Korea, Germany, Japan, going down. But ASEAN continues to go up. How do you explain that? Is it just resources?
I don't think it's resources, because if you look at ASEAN countries, Indonesia has resources, Brunei has resources, population 500,000, doesn't really do much. But Malaysia, Thailand, and the others, #1, they don't have much energy.
No. But there is energy around. I always wonder what's going to happen with the South China Seas. I mean, there was a statement that officials from China, ASEAN, vow to build South China Sea into a sea of peace, friendship, and cooperation at a symposium marking the 20th anniversary of DOC signing.
Good.
But I mean, we've talked about this before. I do think it's a game changer. If China is able to come to terms with its largest trading partner and the one who's in the new trade.
Population of ASEAN now is over, I think, 800 million.
Yes.
And it's headed for 1 billion. And I think, #1, it has resources. #2, it also constitutes a major market, because there are more middle class in ASEAN countries than India, which has a much bigger population.
But what I see, I mean, what you talked about, the resource thing, that was really a colonial era thing. Basically, they owned it, farmed palm oil, things like this. But now it seems that they're starting to gain manufacturing. And a lot of it is being dished off from China.
Yeah.
So as China goes more tertiary, they are following China's footsteps into the secondary markets. I think that's the game changer. This is the difference between what China has done and what the colonial powers did before. The colonial powers basically just said, we own you, we take what we want, and you just continue to serve us. Whereas in China, there seems to be it's both sides, win-win.
It's interesting, because I was just reading a couple of reports on a number of the precious metal developments in Indonesia on some of these islands, some of which are actually uninhibited, but it happened to have some nice things on it. Yeah. Well, actually, those developments are actually funded by Chinese companies. And also, a lot of the manufacturing that's moved to Southeast Asia, not only Southeast Asia, but also South Asia, like Bangladesh, for example, are labor intensive, like textiles, sneakers, moved from
furniture,
China.
A lot of furniture.
Moved from China.
Even motorcycles now, increasingly.
Really?
Yeah, Vietnam, other places, as they do it. Now, EVs, if things start switching over to EV things, I don't know where that market's going to be, but I definitely know that with 800 million people and a desire for more efficiency, electric vehicles are going to be part of that.
I think a couple of things are going to happen. Let's project into the future. In the next 3 to 5 years, ASEAN may become the 4th largest in the world in terms of economic power, behind the US, China, and the EU. It's headed in that direction, and it may overtake the EU one day. That's one part. The second part is it will become, in terms of the percentage of population in quoted, inverted commas, middle class, that's growing so quickly in the ASEAN countries that it becomes a significant market.
So if what I see is this grand thing. In the past, the wealth, power, technology, developed countries, Europe and America, with a few exceptions like South Korea and Japan.
Mm-hmm.
Now, all of a sudden, you start to see China, ASEAN, and South Korea is going to remain where it is, and so is Japan. So the shift of the pendulum in terms of where is going to the east, and there doesn't seem, and ironically, that's actually good for Europe and America to the extent that they can be part of these markets. But it seems increasingly...
But their leaders don't seem to get that.
Yeah, but what I don't understand is how are you going to export if you don't have markets?
That's right.
And if you're exporting things that are more costly than somebody else,
you don't get to export.
Well, what I see right now is the U.S. is cannibalizing Europe by, adding more costs in terms of having them put 2% of their GDP into defense, into the military.
Increasing their energy costs.
Increasing their energy costs because they have to buy LNG from the U.S., which is going to be significantly more expensive because it has to be compressed, shipped, and then decompressed. And then also in terms of food. Food in the U.S. is grown very, very cheaply. But when you start adding on the cost of shipping it across, these waters, all of a sudden, it's not as cheap as it was before. Not as cheap as sending it by rail from Ukraine or from Russia. So there's real issues there about where it's going. But what's the end game? If the U.S. takes whatever Europe has, just in essence, cannibalizes it, eats it for its own benefit.
I think there's no way that the rise of Asia, with China at its core, but the rest of Asia rising very rapidly as well, that can be stopped. U.S. is attempting to slow down China.
I know, but it doesn't make sense. Trying to stop China.
So much of what Western leaders do don't make sense. Einar, you know that.
Okay. Let's talk about there was a lady in Nanjing who was enshrining Japanese war criminals at a temple. You know about this. What was the story?
I think she has psychological problems. The story goes that she's actually felt the spirits of some of these war criminals haunting her at night, so she couldn't go to sleep. She needed some psychological treatment. Yeah. And so she put up these plaques and shrines to beg their spirits to please go to wherever you're supposed to go, and don't bother me.
In their case.
That's right. And don't bother me anymore. But I think what this reflects to me as really significant is it became there was an uproar among netizens in China. How can anybody do this, right? Especially given now that Japan is trying to hit China again.
Well, also trying to change history.
That's right, change history and become militarist again.
Yeah.
So the response is understandable. But what this shows is one psychologically distorted woman can cause so much uproar in the internet age.
Well, it's still a very tender subject. You have the situation with South Korea, who's been demanding, as they have in
comfort
China,
women,
for comfort women, for a complete apology,
as
opposed to these kind of half apologies that they perceive they've gotten.
Distortion of history, also, like you said.
I mean, we've talked of before. Germany was different from Japan. Germany, they went through the whole process, and it was decided that being a Nazi, spreading that kind of material, even saying it it was criminal.
That's right.
But in Japan, it is not. They never went through the process. Abe's maternal grandfather, he was a war criminal, but he was never tried. And although he spent 3 years in prison, he was released so that he could become the conservative arm of the Japanese state to battle the socialists. And he did, in fact, become prime minister. He was backed by the U.S.
Exactly. That's what you said. The last sentence is the most critical. U.S. play politics in Japan.
Yeah, but I mean, he was the founder of the LDP, the party that
Liberal Democratic Party.
yes,
Yeah.
that Abe headed, that is still in control, has been in control all these years. Yet, are they delivering? I mean, I
No
can't
apology,
see it. No,
changing history, continuing to go to the war shrine.
yeah, Yakushuni war shrine.
War shrine with the war criminals.
Which, what people don't realize is that there were no Japanese war criminals buried there originally.
No.
It was, 20 years ago that a group of them moved the bodies or the cremated ashes of these war criminals, Class A war criminals, people who were using other individuals as test subjects, killing them, using them in work camps, literally working them to death, random executions. These types of war criminals, equally as bad as the Nazis, were taken from where they were, put into the Yakushuni shrine because they were military, heroes?
Heroes.
How could they be heroes if they do these types of things?
They did this for the emperor. They did it for Japan. So anything goes.
Well,
which is really very,
the
very
Nazis
dangerous.
did it for Hitler.
Exactly.
I don't think that was an excuse.
It's not an excuse, but that's what the whole process is heading toward.
I mean, this is unfinished business. This is
unfinished.
an example of where history is not over.
Yeah.
Because those who perpetuated the bad acts continue to do it. And the current prime minister doesn't seem to be backing off that. He said wants better relationships with everybody, but we haven't seen any real actions in that direction.
What we see is a direction toward further militarization.
But, I've often wondered, we've talked, I really do believe that Abe was interested in making, quote, in his mind, normalizing Japan as an international power with its own military backup. But at which point, I don't think he would be very interested in having American troops on Japanese soil.
Continue to, right.
Continue to. So at that juncture, America thinks that a independent Japan with its own military will help carry the load in terms of anti-China encirclement. But the fact is, they could find themselves in a situation where the Japanese say, get your troops out of here. We don't need them anymore. They could even go nuclear, at which point they would definitely be looking to get rid of.
I think what the Japanese it's conflicting in their own mind. On the one hand, they've worshipped the U.S. for a long time, and they've depended on the U.S. for a long time. At the same time, Abe and others in LDP are thinking along exactly what you described.
But how can they admire the U.S. when in 1986, the U.S. forced them into the Plaza Accord, and since that time, Japan has been going sideways.
For 30 years.
Yeah. And in the last 10 months, actually backwards.
Yeah.
So at that juncture, I mean, at what point do the Japanese wake up and realize things? Or did Abe know that all along, and that was part of his idea?
I think
Get
it is
militarily
part of his idea.
independent and then economically independent. Repudiate the Plaza Accord.
Very difficult.
Yeah, I know, but difficult. We are in difficult times, and there's going to be people who are going to be suggesting radical things in order to get rid of the things that they think are holding them back.
Like Okinawa.
Okinawa
wants to declare independence.
Yeah. Well, at this point, some in Japan might say, "Fine, you keep the American troops
That's right.
with you, and we'll do it." But I think they want them gone. So, let's talk about Ukraine. This week, basically, there was a retreat that was ordered by the president. He's put out a list of anybody he thinks are not favorable to Ukraine. He's in essence doing exactly what he's accusing Russia of doing, which is censoring the press. I mean, how much time do you give him?
I think there are two things here. One is how much support he will continue to get from the Europeans and the United States. A lot of the more advanced stuff that's been shipped over there has actually gone into the black market and being sold.
There was something about a letter being sent to the French saying thank you from the Russians for selling arms to Ukraine, which they in turn bought.
That's right.
Is that true?
Bought cheap, too.
Bought cheap.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At least it appears there was such a letter.
Yeah.
But there are reports which the Western press hasn't covered fully.
There has been a number of reports saying that munitions are showing up in all parts of the world.
That's right.
And particularly in areas which are not very friendly to the United States.
That's right.
So once again, U.S. arms, and also U.S. arms that were left in Afghanistan are being
all
sold.
over the place.
And they're also being sold all over the place.
So I don't, I think given how things are in the Ukraine, Zelensky may not last a lot longer because the Europeans...
Let's put that on. What do you get? I believe personally that he will be out by next spring.
Yeah,
I think
6 months. I was thinking about the same thing. Yeah. Because you have, given what's happening to Nord Stream 1, only 20% of what was being pumped to Europe is now being pumped.
And it's been cut back a further 20% because the Russians said they needed to do routine maintenance. They're saying that they don't have the equipment that they ordered from Canada to be put in place so that they can continue doing the pumping.
Yeah. How can Europe survive this winter?
Well, the question is, given their own needs, what are the likelihood that they're going to be willing to share and take the financial burden? It's not like Ukrainians don't need food and also energy. So it's going to be really hard to see how these governments are going to stand up. I mean, you've heard a lot of things about more and more money being given to Ukraine. But where is it going to come from? And what is
more and more money the Ukrainians are asking for? Not only that, 10 million refugees all over Europe now. You take them for a week, yes, but not for 6 months, not for a year. So,
last week we talked about the fact that he had arrested his top security advisor and a whole bunch of people within his administration. I haven't heard anything about trials. Nothing from the press about covering whether or not these people are receiving due process or even why they were arrested, other than traitors. All of them traitors. It seems that he is taking of strongman tactics into his own arms. The very same person who ran based on this idea that we don't need more strongmen, we need more democratic ones.
I'm also thinking about 6 months because I don't think Europe can survive this winter.
What do you mean by survive? I mean, look, it's a rich country. What I'm concerned about is they buy up what is available. And it's the poor countries who can't afford it.
That's right.
Sri Lanka is not the only one.
You're talking about not only energy, but also food.
Without food, you can't live.
Yeah. And there will be a lot of social unrest all over the world in the developing countries.
But where's the plan? Where's the G20 getting together and saying, look, we can see this coming. This is like the pandemic, right? You know it's there. You know it's coming.
Yeah.
And yet there's no plan.
Nothing.
There's
That's
nothing.
That's
You're just saying, well, I can't be bothered. I have my own problems here. I mean, is that what the world has come to?
In the U.S., politicians and European politicians are saying, China, you're hoarding too much food.
Yes. So now it's China's responsibility
to
take care of the incompetency of their governments.
Their government and also the developing countries. Yeah. So I think in terms of surviving this winter, the economies of these countries are going to be in a disastrous situation, because energy is not just for heating, but for industrial use, right? You know,
No, the economy's, without food, you can't live. Without energy, your economy
tanks.
can't. Yeah,
That's right.
no, it can't operate.
That's right.
So, I mean, and this is the part, monetary policy, how is that going to change that?
That's right.
All right.
It's not going
Fiscal.
to change it.
Well, you can lower overall demand, but people still need to eat. And funnily enough, they still need to heat their homes. And factories, the ones that are operating, still need energy. This is what I don't understand, this incredible disconnect between very smart people and the realities that are on the ground. I just don't understand it. You still hear Yellen and you still hear the Fed talking about this as if it's some sort of technical issue.
I think what you described, I will put it slightly differently. Not very smart people, but people with objectives which has nothing to do with the well-being of their societies, of their people.
I don't know. I mean, Janet Yellen seemed
okay
until recently. I mean, she really kind of did a 180. Earlier this year, she was talking about all the dangers of what's going to happen, and it happened. And now she seems to be like, well, you know, maybe there's things we can do and things like that. She seems to be making apologies rather than saying, I told you so. And I don't understand it. What kind of pressure is she under?
I think there are two pressures. One is those who said, you were in a position to do something and you didn't.
Yeah, but she suggested it, getting rid of the tariffs. From day one, she said, get rid of them. Oh.
Before that.
Oh, before that.
When she was at the Fed.
Yeah, but they didn't have the same problems then.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree. I mean, the quantitative easing was
the money
huge.
printing.
Adding $9 trillion to their balance sheet.
Yeah.
I mean,
much of that was
on top of the 30 trillion in debt.
Yeah.
That's 40 trillion.
But that
on your sheet.
Much of that was on her watch.
Yeah. But to me, what it says is politics.
Politics.
That you cannot separate it. That the domestic agendas are always going to win out, regardless of what the realities are.
The domestic agendas of the politicians will always win out.
To stay in power. But to stay in power and do what? You're supposed to stay in power to help people, to have a vision, have a plan. And I see it sorely lacking. Oh, let's go on to something else. China economy. You know, one of the big issues that we have to talk about is this: the local bank failures.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, it was trumpeted throughout the foreign press. Oh, this is the end. This is the beginning of the end. Once again, that China is about to fail. Now, there was a lot of were a lot of angry people, but the Chinese government has stepped in. They created a bad debt entity to handle the existing debts out there and try to recover it. And they are honoring what they promised to do, which is up to a certain amount. It's like in the United States, we have the FDIC, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation.
Yeah.
They guarantee, I think it's 100,000.
Yeah.
So if I have 100,000 in an account, they guarantee no matter what happens, I will get my 100,000. China has exactly the same thing, not as large, but they have stepped in, and to my knowledge, they have paid that back. The issue are the people who had more than that in the banks, and they're waiting to see what's going to happen.
I think it'll be addressed. It'll
be addressed somehow, but my point is, at the time it happened, this is the end
of the Chinese financial system.
Yes.
Will once again collapse.
Just
it's
like
systemic, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
But for those of us living in Beijing or Shanghai, Shenzhen, we haven't seen anything.
No. Well, this was a local bank. It was run by
criminals, basically.
Yeah, they infiltrated 3 banks,
yeah,
and then used them in basically a Ponzi scheme to hide their transactions.
That's right. And it was a rural, local, more like a cooperative. rather than a bank.
But this is the great difficulty. I mean, the government was trying to give more flexibility to these small rural banks so that they could make loans to farmers, small entities, small business entities that they're trying to encourage. But this is an example of how if you have criminals, there's always a rat, the criminal, and there's always a cheese, the money. So rather than being a testament to the failure of China, it seems to have been a testament to the fact that China can, in fact, deal with these situations.
That's right. Deal with these situations, pick up the criminals, and address the problem. And that's basically
more than I can say in other countries. Because I mean, just another big bank announced that, oh yes, I'm sorry, we were laundering money for criminals.
You mean Credit Suisse?
Yes. It seems to be the same old story. No one goes to jail, right?
That's right.
They give them a fine and they say, don't do it again. And they don't do it again until they're caught again, doing the exact same things. Unbelievable. HSBC.
HSBC was a big one.
Yeah, and what happened? They were under a lot of pressure, and all of a sudden,
I don't see any indictments.
I don't see any indictments, although they had them cold for.
Yeah.
I mean, they absolutely had them with everything from CCTV footage to specially made wooden boxes, which were so you could cram as much money as you cash in through the teller window.
That's
they were custom made to do that.
Yeah.
And it was only $880 million, I guess. So I guess it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. But based on that, this was the bank that came up with, Huawei doing bad stuff. Don't prosecute us. They were attempting to sell printers, kind of stuff you can get off the shelf to Iran, breaking sanctions.
That's really horrendous.
Yes.
And also,
as opposed to $880 million worth of drug laundering money. I mean, that's small potatoes. Why would you get involved in that?
Also printers to North Korea.
No, to Huawei? No, there was no allegation that they had sold
North
anything.
Korea, really?
No, not to my knowledge. Yeah. Anyway, it seems a little unequal in terms of things. So I suspect that politics is in there.
In other words, if you worked with us to screw Huawei, we'll let you.
Well,
slide.
They did.
Yeah.
They have slid.
Yeah.
I mean, despite the fact that they were caught once again after this event, doing exactly the same thing, still, nothing needs to be said about that. All right, PMI index down.
49 point something.
Yeah, 49.0 down from 50.2. So, what does that say?
Down.
COVID.
Yes,
this
COVID.
is what I see. I mean, as soon as COVID went over, one thing I noticed is the traffic in Beijing went back to normal, unfortunately.
That's right, traffic jams again,
And the restaurants are full. I talked to a number of the hospitality people, and they said, we are going beyond anything where we were. This is busy plus 10%.
I think COVID, especially if you look at June, these numbers are from June. Now, if you look at these numbers, the biggest impact on the Chinese economy was actually shutting down of Shanghai, because Shanghai is such a critical part of the supply chain.
But was it mishandled?
Shanghai I think it was mishandled.
Yeah, I would say that. So there's a difference between a policy and the implementation.
That's right.
And I think very few people I know would dispute the fact that the implementation was flawed at best.
Flawed at best, yes. You're being very kind.
Well, no. I mean, I've talked to people down there, and these aren't people who are, they're very in favor of the government, but they were really disappointed by the local government's handling of this.
I think, given what's happening now, where it's beginning to come back again, after what happened when the initial outbreak came out, this is the beginning of 2020, you had a V-shaped recovery, right? And then again, last year, 2011, there was an outbreak and another V shape.
But 0.4% last quarter,
Yeah.
and the target is 5.5. Question is China going to meet that?
I think it'll be difficult.
Yeah, I agree.
There's another angle to this. China, one sector of China is booming exports.
Yeah.
Exports. And exports, whether or not it will continue to boom, also depends on what happens in other economies.
Yeah, well, this is the thing that I is saying. I think there are going to be more hiccups along the way.
Yeah.
I mean, international relations are not going in the right direction.
That's right.
You could have another, we are experiencing another outbreak of this 2.5 variant, which is spreading around.
And the monkeypox too.
Monkeypox, I don't know if it's hit economically.
Not yet.
Not yet, but it seems to be, it needs to be human touch to human touch, after you have symptoms. So it might be an education system like SARS. You could tell when somebody
Right.
had SARS and you got near them, you could get infected, but if they were symptomatic, there's a way of avoiding it.
The hiccups that you talk about, I think one is geopolitical, of course, but the second is developed country recession, US and Europe.
Why won't the U.S. say it's in recession? I mean, everyone, you remember, we were talking about this. We said they're going into recession. They go into recession and they're like, well, maybe it's not really recession.
That's right, it's a technical definition.
Well, they're pointing towards the employment numbers. And they also had an uptick from, they were expecting 0.9% increase in expenditures, but it was actually 1.1% increase in expenditures. But I put that down to inflation, not people buying more stuff. Housing is still going strong. People are buying used cars at higher numbers because simply they can't get a new car. But I don't see the kind of activity that's going to last long run.
This is what the economists do. In fact, what has happened is the U.S. has already entered into a recession.
But they're not admitting it. Why?
Not only are they not admitting it, they're coming up with all kinds of arguments of technically in recession.
Okay, but if China had 2 negative months, end of the world, right?
That's right.
It's in deep recession. It's about to tank. I just, the hypocrisy of it just doesn't seem to ring true.
We're going to see that in Germany and the UK very soon.
Yeah. Well, okay, let's go down to 5.5% GDP target softening. I do think that there will be a V-shaped, and I'm going to go on record and say that I think that they'll probably be around 5.2%. And the model that I'm using is based on exactly what you said, that V-shaped recovery. It's going to be hard to hit 5.5 though.
Very hard.
But at the time they said, look, we talked about this. Why did they give a hard target? And I think they were trying to give people encouragement. I think it was more psychological and confidence, as opposed to giving a range where people can say, well, gee, I guess they're not as confident.
There are explanations about the export part also. Why is it that despite the supply chain problems all over the world, the logistics and so on, and shipping, China's export continued to blossom? It's because even if the economies don't do well in the Western world, they still need the basics, which are mostly produced in China. Yeah. In fact, you can't get it anywhere else.
Yeah, we always talk about auto parts.
That's right.
Where are they made?
In China. Exactly.
So if you're buying a used car, it's going to need more parts.
That's right.
And those parts are going to come from China. And there's so many things. Even if you're not buying stuff, you still need to repair things.
That's right.
Generators, all of these things. They need screws, they need magnets, they need all the things that intermediate goods that go into them to repair them. So I do believe that China has, but it also explains the divergence between what we were talking about, the developed economies, the export powerhouses, diving, China continuing to rise.
Yeah.
What does China do? Essential items, things
That's
you
right.
can't do without. What do they sell? Choice items.
Yeah.
Things that would be good
Louis
for
Vuitton.
expansion. Louis Vuitton. Well, I'd be interested to see what happens to the luxury market because there is such a divergence between the very wealthy and the poor.
Yeah.
And I sense in some that it is changing. I know that in Europe and America, there have already been trends where people are switching brands to the lowest possible price because you don't have a choice. 20% of British households had a sharp decline in their disposable income. Guess where that 20% is? At the lowest end of the economic level.
That's right. And then you have the other part is as electricity prices continue to go up, I have friends in the UK who said their monthly bill compared to a year ago was 9 times.
9 times.
9 times higher electricity.
And this is in the summertime.
This is in the summertime.
Well, no, last year was a hot year too. Very hot year.
No, but energy prices were not the same.
I know, but I'm just saying that there's no extraordinary big difference between
right.
this year and last
That's
year.
right.
So that 9 times price is all due to inflation.
That's right. Fuel cost.
And they can't escape that.
No.
Remind me again, how's monetary policy going to change that? All right, so the U.S. has been very busy on the domestic front. A country that says free markets should not be interfered with. You know, the Chicago school says let the market do it. Is now putting
and all the accusations of China supporting its state-owned
well, that's the
company.
problem with China is that they support their
right.
industries. Yeah,
So
but
that's
now
unfair.
yeah, so now the U.S. is putting almost $300 billion into supporting tech companies directly, in addition to the previous one, which didn't really seem to support tech companies, just seemed to build tech centers in the states of friendly congressmen and senators. But I mean, how much do you think this is going to create innovation?
Hypocrisy aside,
Yeah.
okay, of accusing others of doing things and then you do it yourself, that aside, I don't think it's going to make that much of a difference. To put up chip factories in Arizona or Texas is not so simple. By the time you have something built, you'll be 5 years down the road. Especially in the US, they're not really known for good infrastructure
Or speed.
or speed.
Yeah.
And such large construction projects are few and far in between now over the last several decades in the US.
But what I don't understand, exactly what you just said, they're going to put a new, I noticed that they moved the number from 8 nanometer to 5 nanometer
Now
to be
down
completed.
to 3. Yeah.
No, this is one they're putting in Arizona or Texas. I can't remember exactly which one. But they said that they're going to do 5 nanometer chips, and it'll be done by 2025. But they're already doing 3 nanometer chips.
That's right.
Here, and they're looking at 2 nanometer. So, I mean, it seems like they're taking their second tier technology, and we're
then
talking,
moving it.
and
Yeah.
we're talking here about Japan and
Taiwan.
to the
Korea.
U.S.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're not doing that. Well, Korea has actually entered into an agreement to build a bigger chip plant in China.
In China, yeah.
So,
I think there are 2 parts here. 2025 is exceedingly optimistic projection. To build chip factories, equipment has to be ordered ages in advance. You remember I was at Applied Materials for some time.
yes.
It takes,
They know a little something about
something.
this technology area. I think they
was
own
on
a
the
good
board for 5 years, you know.
Yeah.
That's number 1. Number 2, you need engineers. Where are the engineers going to come from? Are you going to hire them all from China?
Well, you can't because there's security risk.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They would steal the technology.
Yeah,
So-
this technology they created, they would steal it.
That's
No,
right.
okay,
It's
no,
just
I'm
like 5G. The Chinese
well, Chinese are incapable of
developing
innovation.
it. That's right.
Yeah, yeah.
Just
We all
happens
know
that
that.
the US doesn't have 5G at all.
Well, they have some, not much, but
But I think 2025, number one, is overly optimistic.
okay.
I think 4 to 5 years before anything is really set up is probably more realistic. Secondly, the engineers that will build the factory, there's a short supply, and the engineers that will run the factories will also be in short supply. I just don't see it. I see it more again as a political game of subsidizing major U.S. chip companies.
But we're now, where there's the chip shortage. Now all of a sudden we're starting to see a slowdown in chips. A market glut, either caused by lessening demand or, what is bringing these chip factories online during times when you don't want the chips? Isn't that going to cause it to fall?
Okay, the shortage of chips were from, I think, a bigger reason for the shortage that occurred a couple months ago is in the logistics rather than the manufacturing, because most of what the market is using now is not 7 nanometers. It's not even 14 nanometers. It's 28 nanometers or even bigger.
Especially for cars. You don't need small.
For cars, for refrigerators, for air conditioners,
vacuum cleaners, yeah. Even your smart hot pot.
That's it. All of that.
Yeah. Some reason it doesn't have the same chip as your phone. I don't know why.
That's right. And even phones, right? It's 14 and 7, basically.
Yeah.
No,
and China's made headway on that.
China's made big headway. So I expect the chip side, there will be a global glut.
It's going to be a bloodbath.
That's right.
And I think those things, the same thing applies to oil. Everyone's pushing them to produce more oil, produce more petroleum facilities. But if overall demand is going down, I think OPEC is very, very cautious.
Very cautious. And why is it that the former Seven Sisters and the
Seven Sisters explains, and just in case somebody out there doesn't know the Seven Sisters.
It's the major oil companies in the world that dominates the oil market.
There's the Seven Sisters of universities, women's universities.
Wellesley, Barnard,
Smith.
Yes, I remember them.
Oh, yes, you do.
In terms of the Seven Sisters, the oil companies and so on, if they don't see major demand increases, they're not going to invest in increasing the supply.
Well, that's the logic of money as opposed to the logic of politics.
That's right.
Yeah.
But I think the chip thing, like you said, it's just like the oil. The chip thing, much of this 3 nanometers, 5 nanometers stuff is for a very, very narrow market niche. Yeah. We talked about the cell phones, right? Yeah. How much more capacity do you need on your cell phone? Especially with 5G and eventually 6G, things will be processed in the cloud.
Exactly.
And stored in the cloud.
And I'm a big believer that it's going to be more about the efficiency of the chips in terms of battery.
That's
and
right.
ability to run the screen, and that the processing power itself should be in the cloud.
That's right.
Because the idea of carrying around a supercomputer in my hand that's capable of doing almost any kind of calculation or running through
Can you imagine?
Yeah.
Talk about the pitch that's going on. Can you imagine? You have a quantum computer on your
these
cell
are
phone.
mind-boggling stuff. Yeah.
But that's what part of the 280 billion is supposed to go to. Quantum algorithms,
but
AI.
In the old days, they would invest in things like Bell Labs, hard science things. And it's not clear how they do it. They talked about it, but when you start combing through these bills, right, it seems like it's a giveaway to the corporate welfare.
That's right.
That has never worked in the past. I don't know
And
if
it
it's going
won't
to work
work now.
Yeah.
Because we're already seeing cases, for example, Foxconn in your native state.
Oh, yes.
What a disaster, right?
Well, not for Foxconn. They're now
not for Foxconn.
Yeah, they now own a huge swath of land that used to be farmland that is now
With
zoned highways and
utilities.
lots of electricity and sewer and water.
That's right.
And it's zoned industrial, commercial.
And all paid for by the state of Wisconsin.
Well, maybe it'll all work out in the end.
You were one of the taxpayers that contributed to this.
No, I stopped paying taxes by the time I had left. But they did call me and ask me about it. And I said, well, Terry Gu, who is the president of Foxconn, has had this roadshow going for quite some time, where he shows up in different countries or different states and says, what do I want to build a factory here. I'm going to produce lots of jobs and things like this. And let us say that very little has actually come to fruition. Even at the time that he was proposing to build this new plant in Wisconsin, he was doubling the already enormous, largest factory he had in China. So I pointed this out to a lot of the state officials. They just said, well, it's, what are we going to say? No to jobs? I said, if the jobs don't come, you're not saying no. You're just saying the emperor has no clothes.
That's right.
And that's the key. Politicians today don't have the courage to just come out and say what the truth is.
That's right.
And talking to that, let's talk about Julian Assange. All right. I've never been a big fan of him personally because I thought that he used the notoriety of others. For instance, Manning, who went to jail. All right. He inserted himself into it. Now, that's different from the function that WikiLeaks provided, which showed in graphic detail in exactly what the U.S. was doing in terms of gunning down innocent civilians. I mean, they have the videotape. And if anyone doubts this, they can go online and look at it directly. This was being hid from the American people. It was being hid from the world. The U.S.ers refuse to take responsibility. They do not recognize the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court under the UN. And also important documents saying what the true assessment of the war in Afghanistan and Iraq were. These were messages sent by diplomats saying clearly, this is a waste of time. We're losing treasure and lives and accomplishing nothing. And they want to keep this hidden. So he has become the poster child for the U.S. being able to extradite him to the U.S., where I don't know what kind of trial he'll get.
What you described, I put it another way. It's become Julian Assange rather than what information disclosed.
Yeah.
He became the core of the story rather than the information that was disclosed by WikiLeaks.
And it bothers me because in the U.S. we decry, we're always out there saying that, journalists need to be protected. The free press is important. That's what's wrong with China, is you don't have a free press. And the moment somebody puts out something that they don't like, it's the truth. No one is saying it isn't the truth.
That's right.
They're just saying, well, secrets, you shouldn't expose our secrets. That's national security. But if the national security is undermining, right, the democratic process by preventing the people from knowing the truth about really what their government is doing, how can you expect somebody to change the government, which is the point of democracy, if the government lies to them about what it's doing?
That's right. Government not only lies to them, but lies to the whole world.
Yeah. And that is a good place to end this. Credibility is important. If we're going to solve any of this stuff, people have to start acting out what they say. You have to walk the walk. You cannot preach but not practice.
Just talk the talk.
Talk the talk. So that brings us to the close of another episode of Speak Softly with Charles and me.
And Einar.
Pleasure, as always. Next week.
Next week.